Good afternoon. This is another Avolites online training session. It is Friday the 15th of May already. Oh, it's nearly 2 months that we've been doing these sessions from our homes around the country. Okay, so today we have another Q&A session. So do jump into the chat if you've got some questions. The reason we've got two days in a row this week is we had a few people from other time zones querying about Q&A and webinars, so we did yesterday's one earlier. We're not going to be running 2 Q&As every week, it just happens that this week is what happened. Anyway, on with the show. So I had an email from one of our users, Steve. I've forgotten his surname, I'm very sorry. I've definitely communicated with him before. Good to have you with us as a user, Steve. My brain is wandering now very slightly. Anyway, he had been using the dynamic content page. Good day, Dean. It's actually Aaron today. You are correct in that Gordon does some of the webinars. You make me realise I hadn't actually introduced myself. Steve had been using the dynamic content page, and he'd been trying to bring in some code from the website ShaderToy, and he'd been having some troubles. And he quite rightly, he emailed me with a few questions and sort of like how could he approach troubleshooting the results it gave, and sort of a few questions about sort of ease of use and things like that, and they're all good valid questions. So I'm going to look at a few of them, and unless I get lots of other questions pouring in, I can make it go on for as long as necessary. I've had a couple of good ideas off the back of sort of planning for this session today as well. I'll show you some examples I've got later for using shader code, using GLSL. And I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to maybe look at uploading them all, and maybe to the Facebook group, and linking to a few other sites, because I've got most of these have come from other sites, and sort of so we can do a sort of an AI-centered tutorial with the help of a few other places that provide knowledge as well. And the second thing I think I'm going to start, which today has made me think about, it's very hard to know every single error in a code environment, but there are common ones that pop up. So maybe what I'll do is I'll make a Google spreadsheet or something like that, a Google Word document, and again I'll link to it in the Facebook group, and I'll put some common sort of things on there that we can experience. Anyway, Dean, Steve Warren is your man to speak to in relation to what you are saying there. Okay, so let's get on with the show. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to close my interface down a bit. My machine is so I'm on. Normally I do a server into my laptop. I don't know if that's going to help actually. Normally I do a server into my laptop, and today, because I'm going to access the internet a bit through this, I have decided that my laptop should be the main machine, and so it's currently blowing its little fan to pieces at the moment. Okay, so without any more gabble, I'm going to open up the Shader Toy template. So that's Distrib Patches, Dynamic Content. We've got a template section, and we have a Shader Toy template there. So I'm just going to grab that one. We're going to open up the template patch by clicking on the large module, and then we're going to open up the shader code patch here. So it's double clicking on both of those. Let me just put that there. But I'm going to just shrink that one down. Okay, so let's not be too intimidated by anything that we see there. Okay, so first of all, in fact, let's make this a bit nicer. I'm going to just drag this out of the way. So one of the first questions related to, in fact, I'm just going to hide the connections there. There we go. One of the questions related to sort of usability of visible text, moving through text, editing text. There's a few little bits there, and so I'll sort of address that first. So one of the things I like to always do, I find this window here, the compiler output, is too small for me. So we can actually enlarge the size of this, and this logic stands for the text patches as well. So I'm going to just make the module area bigger. Now, normally when I click and drag with my left mouse button, it just drags the module, but if I hold Control, I can select all of those inputs and outputs. I'm just going to drag them out of the way. You can see they're sort of highlighted in a light purple when I'm keeping Control held. Okay, quick answer to Dean there. So, does this take up universe? I'm looking at Titan Mobile for install, but I've got around 16 universes of pixel tape. So, the media server can output DMX or ARNet, or SACN if you like. It can actually deal with up to 256 universes. Possibly if you want to go through a console though, you might be better using Synergy, which is where we integrate AI and Titan together, and then you'll get your video output directly into your pixel mapper in the console. Speak with, sorry, I'll get back to the Steve Calcutt. I'll get back on track in a moment. But Dean, if you speak with Steve Warren, him and Ron are doing sessions at the moment, and they're actually demonstrating things like Synergy. Ask him for a Synergy demo. This sounds like what you need, basically. Okay, let me get back on track. So, I'm going to make this window bigger. So I'm going to hold my Control button in, and this takes a little bit of practice. You have to hold your mouse just slightly to the right of the bit you want to drag, about there. I'm going to left click and hold my mouse in, and I can drag that area out. The first few times you try this, you can't find it at all, but you can see there that I can get it first time every time now. So that's one way to enlarge the area that text is shown. So one of the issues Steve was having was when he was pasting in the text, it was too much text for that window. So you can sort of like move your modules around. Now, all this being said and done, like that. All this being said and done, I am not, and I don't think I'm alone when I say this, the text module was never really made for editing code, if we're honest. So you get some weird results, like when you press enter, it actually leaves the box, it accepts the text rather than forcing a new line like you would expect in a text editor. So, when it comes down to it, I actually don't edit that much text inside of these text boxes. So, before I actually get onto the code that Steve's provided, I'll just quickly show you a couple of tools that I use instead of the text box directly in the patches. I'm going to show you two options here. So the very first one, Notepad++. So this is a really simple, really useful utility. So I've got it just here. Now it's basically a notepad. In fact, that's got the code in that I had from Steve earlier. The real benefit to this is that it gives you line numbers. So when we are in our patch, which I've just minimized. There we go. When we run our compiler, it will give us an error on a line number. So this can be really useful for that. Sorry, I see my things going down there. This can be really useful for that because it gives you the reference directly to line. So when it says line 26, you can come in and you can say, okay, that's line 26, and you can even sort of click on the line there to select the whole line. It just makes your life a little bit easier. So this is Notepad++. Is quite commonly used amongst developers and people dealing with code, but it's not an intelligent system, so it still requires that you understand what the errors are and how to cure them and even to spot them, because not every compiler will tell you the precise line problem. Anyway, so this is a really good option. This is a free option. Now the second option I'm going to show you is also a free option. It's a little bit more complex, but it's a lot more powerful. So this is Visual Studio Code. So Visual Studio is a really popular programming platform. We use Visual Studio in both our Titan and our AI development teams. Visual Studio Code specifically is a free version, a downloadable version. It's not, you wouldn't necessarily want to develop Titan or AI in it, but for the purposes of things like shader code, it works really well. So you can download it from here. It does take a little bit of setup, VS Code, but it's really nice. And I'm just going to open it and just make a couple of recommendations in here. So it's useful to add a couple of things if you run Visual Studio Code for the first time. So if you go to this bottom tab here, the one with the blocks on it, there's two things we want to. So normally you would search here for the things. Now actually there's two things I'm going to show you at the top of my list here. I would recommend searching for GLSL Canvas. So this is going to basically mean that when you're making code in Visual Studio, it's going to give you a video output window so that you can see in real time the effect of what you're doing. And this GLSL Canvas module is actually written by the people who do the Book of Shaders, which I'm going to point out in a moment as well. There we go. Terry is in the chats there. Terry Clark is one of our AI developers. Lots of syntax highlighting exactly. So the second thing I'm going to recommend here is search for GLSL lint. And what linting does, linting, I'm actually going to just make a new file. Rather than where we saw in Notepad, all our text is just a single colour. It's kind of hard to see. If I'm just literally going to copy that code. When we have it in here, I've just got to save it as a GL. So it won't apply the linting until you save it as the right file type. So we're going to save it as a GLSL. I think it's right down the bottom. Yeah, there we go. I'm going to just save that there. There we go. So you can see the linting has kicked in now. So linting's really nice because it actually understands code, and because it has an understanding. I can't remember if I actually put in my shader language support for the VS Code separately, but because it understands the code, it's kind of color codes the different chunks of code. So again, when you're troubleshooting, it becomes a little bit easier to sort of comprehend what's going on. And in this one, in fact, you will get, let's see if I can just make some really basic error. Let's just do that. We're going to go run, start debugging. Okay, yeah, no, I failed there. That's what happens when I try and show you stuff. But it will, when you've got the debugger open, it will actually tell you, when it runs through, it will give you like a red mark on the line, and it will show you which line has the error first, and it will give you some hints on the right. And anyway, I'm not going to concentrate on those at all, because I am not the man for demonstrating those. What I'm going to do, I'm going to get back to the shader code question in hand. I'm going to look directly at the piece of code which Steve sent me. I'm very sorry it's taken me a little bit of gabbling to get to this point, Steve. So I'm going to just open up a window there just so that we can see the output. And also we have to have an active output on our chain because it's a yellow GL chain. Okay, so what Steve sent me did is he has sent me two chunks of code here. Let me just move that one out of the way. And I quite like what he's done here, actually. One of the things he's done is actually pretty damn sensible. No, I'm not saying that anything else he did wasn't sensible, but I liked the approach on one. So rather than just use the standard inputs as we've applied them here, he brought in the existing ones from the shader. So he's sent me the code as the inputs and the main part of the code. So what we're going to do first, this is the first part. So you can see that this one varies. You probably can't do, actually, that might be a little bit small, that text. It varies a little bit to the standard one that we've given. But what it does mean is it means it's going to match the code that we paste in. So it's actually quite a sensible idea. So I'm going to just double click in there, double click and we'll clear it, and then Control V to paste what I've just copied. There we go. There we go. And then we're going to just do the same with the second chunk of text. And we are going to paste that one into there. So now I'm going to press compile, and we're going to get an error, which is good. So what I'm going to try and do, okay, let's see if I can zoom. No, in fact, what I'm going to do here, I'm going to paste this onto a notepad because I don't want to just want a normal notepad now. Oh no, let's just open that notepad. There we go. I'm really hoping I can zoom in here. No, I can't zoom, obviously. Bear with me. I should check that one in advance. Okay, let's do that. Let's just do that. I'm just using this notepad because I know it does exactly what I want it to do. Okay, cool. Okay, so this is just what it's showing me on the compiler here. These are the errors. So when you see, so we've basically got 3 errors here, and you can see each of these errors starts with a 0 and then a number in a bracket. 08, 044, 077. So immediately when I look at this, I can see essentially we've got actually 2 errors, and probably those last 2 errors are caused by the same fault. And so we've got this one up here. So 2 types. So this top one, let's go from the first. So when you see syntax error in a statement, it means that there is something wrong with the way they are written. Yeah, there's something wrong with the way they're written, or it could be that things have been put in a certain order. It's not a very descriptive term in itself. It just tells you to look at essentially the grammar, the structure of what's in there. And it's also telling me that it's on line 8. Now, rather than me sitting here for ages and going through the text, I know what the problems are. So what it's doing, just to confirm, the way we're presenting it here, these 2 notepads are actually joined together in one. So it's saying line 8, and it's actually starting from here at the very top. Now I know we've got a line here that says uniform sampler XX, and then it states the name. So we're creating some inputs here. Now the issue on this particular line is that we don't like this variable XX. So if I change that to sampler 2D, and then I press enter and I compile, we're going to lose that top error. Oh, I just pressed the wrong button there, didn't I? What did I just do? Ah, yeah, and let's take that. Go. Okay, cool. So it needed a 2D instead of the XX, and what it was doing, because it was using XX, it was, rather than individually, this is a texture it's setting up, rather than individually setting up a load of separate textures, it's saying, it's giving us a variable and saying give me a range of textures. Now we don't like that either, so I've changed it to 2D and I've just changed it to a single texture. So if I wanted multiple textures after that, I'd do another uniform sampler 2D iChannel 1, then I do uniform sampler 2D iChannel 2, and so on. So that's got rid of the first error for us. So although we've got 4 bits here now, if I look through them, I can see that they're all relating to the same thing. So, and it's just giving us 2 references for every error there. So I had a bit of a look, and this one is a nice simple one, and this is going to be a rule that I'm going to put on the document, which will contain common things that we can encounter. So I looked through the code to line 44 and line 77, and there's a use of iterations down there somewhere. I'm not going to find it in the process. It's down there somewhere. In fact, let's go back to there. So I'm going to be in the wrong place now, aren't I? So it's iteration. There it is. Now actually that's because I haven't put in that first bit of code there, that we've got about 9 lines missing. So we've got one there, and there is one down here somewhere. There we go. There it is there. Now because we're getting 2 errors, I realised that we have to sort of trace it back to its root. And you can see this is a nice thing that Notepad++ does actually. Where I've highlighted the word, it's highlighted all other instances. So the 2 instances that are giving an error, they have to have a shared error because there's 2 instances. So I went back here and I found this first version. It says define hash key define iterations 128, and basically it can be a valid way of making this statement, but actually in our implementation, or the implementation that we used, it's not an acceptable way. So what I'm going to do, let's go back to that one there. Ooh, this is complex. So at the moment it says hash define iterations 128. So what it's doing is making a variable called iterations, and it's applying a value of 128 to that variable. However, we want to do it slightly differently. Now, because it's an integer, that means it's a whole number. It doesn't have a point value after it. If it had a point, we'd refer to it as a float. It's an integer, so we're going to define an integer, and we are going to make what's called a constant. So we're going to go con const int iterations. We want to assign it a value of 128, and then we'll need to end the line correctly in code like that. So that is what we're going to replace that line with. So anytime you see like define and then I've just gone blank for the name of the thing, the function, and a value, we can do it like that. If it had been like 128.3, we'd do const float. In fact, I don't know if we can have a float as a constant. Anyway, so I am going to just, even though it's a little bit awkward, I'm just going to do the typing in here. So I want to do const int. Terry is probably watching in wonder and understanding the terror that my brain is going through at the moment doing live coding. So hopefully now, when I press compile, oh, I pressed bypass. Okay. Right, why did that not work for me? That worked beautifully for me earlier. Iterations. Okay, what I'm going to do very quickly, I'm going to very briefly open up my chat app because I have the answer typed in there. Absolute fail, eh? This is what happens when I try and do live coding. Come on. There we go. Terry with the correct definition there. Constant means that you cannot reassign the value later. Thank you. Let me just do that. Let me just do that. Const int iterations. Iterations. So why does that not work for me? That worked for me earlier. Oh, joy. Absolute joy. Ah, well, this is a fail, isn't it? There we go. Const int. Now, it might be... I'll tell you what I'm going to do, actually. Let me just copy that. Sometimes the GLSL program module can go a bit wonky if we put too many errors through it, so I'm just going to reopen the patch. That might actually solve it, because I think what I'm typing is correct there. Wrong one. Poor old Steve. I on the email to him earlier, I was like, I'll do it in the session this afternoon, it'll be fine. We'll do that there, and then let's just open that one. I'm going to just adjust my bit before I paste it to D. Channel 0. Ah, iterations. Well, this is less than successful. So that is down to somehow what I've done there. Okay. Wow, wow. Okay, let's try doing that. Ah, well, would you credit it? This is like working with children on television, or animals. Fortunately, I don't have any children, and I have a sleeping dog next to me. Oh, I really wish I'd saved that instance earlier. Iterations. Let me just do ITERATIONS. ITER. Okay, so rather than me look even stupider than I already look, I am going to... I want to empty my recycle bin as well earlier. I can't even show you the done picture of it. I did at least send a picture to Steve earlier. Okay, so this is a really good example of why I need to use my coding more often than I currently do. So usually the suggestion of undefined variable means that there's something within this main body of text which is using a variable which we haven't defined. But here I have defined the variable. Anyway, let's... Oh, I've just pressed something, haven't I? Minimised that wrong window. Oh yeah, Terry's got a good plan there. Terry has a good plan. So rather than have the reference to the code, Oh goodness, I should have done that in Notepad. Rather than do the reference, I'm just going to replace that 128 because that's what it's actually referring to. Oh, it might not let me though because I'm on the fragment there. Let's see what it does. Yes, there we go. Terry for the win. I really think it was just something. Maybe I had more spaces in there that I realised. Sometimes you can't see a space in this editor as well. So Terry wins. Now with this shader in particular, it needs a time value. So if you right click and insert module, go to time and use brain freeze, clock tick. There we go, clock tick. And if you use render, no, if you use frame, I can't remember if I used frame or render time. I think it was frame. No, render time. So frame is the current frame in video terms, so it's going from 0 to 30 or whatever. If you use render time, it will continue. There we go. There we go. See, this is why we pay Terry to do coding and not me. So, now that we have that little puppy working, let me escape from the specific bit of code. I'm going to save that one in fact. So let's just take that back into AI. That was going to be my overall aim there. So to save your shader code patch, go back to the root, make sure you save the root, save as, then we'll go into the dynamic content. I've got a box there that I called Aaron. Let's call this one Steve. Just Steve's patch. Save that there. I'm just going to close all this down because it's going to be happier. Bring that one over to there. So now that we have our piece of content made, I'm going to go to the dynamic content page. Now my folder's showing there because I had it on load up, but you'll see it's only got that one in there. So to refresh the browser, if you right click and do refresh list, there we go. I didn't save it with a good thumbnail. I also saved it with the window open, amateur mistake there. Click the button, whack it on, and so on. I'm very sorry it came a bit wrong there, Steve. Hopefully it's good to see that we all struggle. I think one of the biggest secrets about using code and development of code is it's not really a secret to those in the know, but those outside the coding world expect programmers will know everything, and the reality is that most programmers don't know everything, and they're just good at looking at other sources, referencing other sources. It's why we work as teams, basically. One person can be mighty, but as a team they can be formidable. I wanted to just show you some examples that I'm going to give you as well. So I mentioned the idea of maybe doing a group of patches that I can share on the group, and I keep referencing this website, thebookofshaders.com. So this website is awesome. Like, you go through these sections. Let's go to Hello World. Come on. And it will take you, it will start you off on coding, and all this stuff is live as well. So 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 0. So you can see that I can actually adjust those in real time and change the values and all that stuff. So it's a really good resource. Now what I've actually done, and the thing that I was thinking about sharing, is I have some patches I've made. Now a lot of these patches is all using shader code. A lot of these are from Shader Toy, Book of Shaders. Sorry, not Shaders. There are some from Shader Toy, in fact. Let's just open a couple and have a quick look. But I'm quite happy to make all of these available. Let's just try this one. This one should be mental. There you go. That's pretty mental straight off. That one's off of Shader Toy. So that one's a bit crazy. Now, a lot of these in here are more just simple concepts. Let's go through. I quite like some of these motion... Oh, wrong button there. Didn't mean to press that. I meant to press open. I quite like some of these motion graphics ones. Some nice movement. Let's try just that one randomly. So, and these, some of these patches, like these are directly ones from the Book of Shaders. So like they have a whole, if you go down to the examples gallery, they have a whole section on things like motion graphics. In fact, they don't call it motion graphics, do they? No, they call it motion toolkit. I mean, you do see more. So there's loads of different things in here to look at, and I have already created loads of these into AI compatible Oh, I've done it again, haven't I? I keep doing that. Wipes and stuff like that. What else have we got? Things like spinning tiles and all this kind of stuff. So I think what I'll do is I'll share all these patches. There we go. Mr. Kieran is in there. So always pay attention to what Mr. Kieran Abrams says. Kieran is our lead developer. Good to have you with us, Kieran. He says he thinks the error is because when you're combining two Salvation Notepad modules, the top Notepad's last line has a comment after the variable, so when you combine the second Notepad, it comments out the first line. Ah, okay. Putting a line break in there. There we go. I bet it was as simple as that. So basically, I shouldn't have used the first line on that second Notepad. So that is a tip from our lead developer there. Thank you very much, sir. Yeah, what I'm going to do, I'm going to share these patches. I'm going to do it via the Facebook group. I think that's going to be the best option. I'll share these patches. I'll start making I'll include things like try avoiding the first line. The ones that we've seen today where we don't want to use define statements, where we want to explicitly cast it as a constant, and a few other things that we can put in there. So I can also put links to things like the Notepad++ and Visual Studio Code and all that. But yeah, hopefully a lot of these examples, they're quite simple, a lot of these examples, but that's precisely why I've done it. I've done it so that you've got ones that you can go into and just look at specific functions, tiling shapes, Veroni, stuff like that. I think that's one that I made, the wax lamp. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, even stuff like this can actually be, that's all the code that is being used to generate this. And I'm using LFOs, but again, this could be like MIDI controllers, anything like that going into there. Okay. So, I haven't actually seen any other questions at all pop up in the chat room whatsoever. I hope that's helped, Steve. I apologise for brief mental freezing in the middle. I imagine it's probably opened up questions, but that is how it goes with this kind of thing. Coding is one of those things that you do have to, in the ideal world, you should be able to copy and paste things, but in reality, different coders work in different ways, so they set up things differently in their code. And whilst there are usually sort of standard and best practice, there's also the ways that people prefer to work, ways that relate to their specific brain and how they like to think. So yeah, you will always encounter, with things like coding, you'll always encounter some differences. And so often, don't be afraid to contact us and ask. We will always try and help if we can. Google, I know that you have actually done some Googling before that, you mentioned it, but Google is a really good friend. So like I would type in, where we had those compiler errors, I would type it like the syntax error when I'd type that in, and sometimes they get followed by a code like CS5001 or something like that. They can be quite useful. If you do fancy getting your hands a bit dirtier, it can be quite useful to look at something like C++. So although they're not directly the same, they're from the same overall family, and a lot of what you learn in terms of formatting and structure and understanding the components of the code is carries over to some of the shader code. And quite honestly, a lot of the shader code stuff starts at quite a high level of learning, so it can be useful just to get a little bit of C++, just so you're not completely drowning on the first lesson. Okay, so I think that without further ado, I should probably go over to that little screen there.